Well, welcome everyone to the 4% Blueprint. Today we're going to talk about how top L&D teams everywhere outperform the rest. And we're going to have a lively, spirited, fun debate with two absolute experts who know what they're talking about. We have Rocky Basel from ATD, she's the research director there. And we have Nina Caro, who is the first Chief Human Success Officer in the world at Zensai. Very excited to have you both.
Thanks.
How are you doing today?
Very good. Thank you,
Excellent.
Robin.
Excellent.
How are
Excellent.
you?
I'm great. I'm excited for this. This is one of my favorite topics in the world. You know, we're always talking about how to develop, grow, invest in people in the right way. And of course, what we're here to do is we're here to challenge the assumptions around L&D. We're here to have a spirited debate. We're here to really think about what can we do to innovate further in L&D. It's not like L&D or the idea of learning and development is something new. It's been around for a long time. But we're also at an interesting point in time where there's so much change happening in the world. There's so much development happening so rapidly that everybody everywhere in every organization, all the way from the CEO to the CHRO to the manager level to the individual level, of thinking about how can I develop the right skills, both for myself, but also for my teams to be the best that they can be every single day. And so we're here to have a debate about this, talk about this. Just for myself, I'm Robin Daniels. I'm the Chief Business Officer at Zensai, and welcome to today's session. So let's get started. The first question that we want to debate is really around this obsession that we have with measuring ROI and L&D. Is that really hurting or helping innovation? And we see many pros and cons. Lots of debate online around this. Rocky, why don't we start with you? You've been researching this for a long time. You're the expert here. Tell us your point of view.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. But when thinking about ROI, I think it's both, right? I think it's helping and it's hurting innovation. ROI really helps keep us accountable and can really make what we're doing relevant. We can justify that information to our C-suite. We can really say that the learning that we are doing is helping, and that we're able to move a metric, or we're able to improve a KPI. So we're able to show when we're measuring ROI that it's money well spent, and then it makes it easier to ask for money later when we want to do something else new. But it can also really narrow our focus and discourage experimentation, because we're going to continue doing what works rather than trying out new things, because we know it works, right? We know we're going to get that good ROI on something that works. So why would we try something new? Earlier this year, ATD partnered with Zensai to create this report called The Future of Evaluating Learning and Measuring Impact. And we surveyed over 200 L&D professionals, and they told us a lot about what they're doing to measure impact and evaluate learning at their organizations. And we found that 90%, so nearly everybody, said that it's hard to isolate learning's impact. So if you think that your organization is the only one that's struggling with this, you're not, right? 90% of organizations are struggling with trying to isolate learning's impact. And 81% told us that they don't have access to the right data to be able to conduct this type of analysis, that they don't have access to it, or they're not collecting it. And then another 78% said that they don't have the staff to do this type of analysis, that they just don't even know how to conduct an ROI analysis, or they don't know, how to do higher level analysis. And previous research that we've done at ATD found, when we were looking at the ROI methodology, that only 4% of organizations are actually doing the entire ROI methodology. So again, if you think everybody else is doing it, they're not. Found that a quarter are measuring all 4 levels of evaluation, right? So not everybody's even measuring all 4 levels of evaluation. I think that, going back to the question, it's helping, but it's also hurting innovation. But also, I don't think that as many organizations are doing this as what we assume they are. So, Nina, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, what I'm thinking is, I think definitely I think we have a tendency to speak about either or, right? But I don't think it's either or. I think it can be both and, right? So it's
Mhm.
not it's a little bit like in in HR and the people things we talk about. Is it you can get engagement or you can get performance, but I think you can actually have both, and we need to kind of work in a setting where we get both, right? In a business setting at least, because ultimately we're a group with some aligned goals that we want to achieve, whatever organization or business setting we're in, right? That's what we do in a business environment. So you have to have both, and I think you can actually have both, and you need to strive for that. But but um, I would say also to take a step back, because ROI. Yes, I think when I read the report, I really thought about was where it says those who set their learning and business goals were very aligned were more likely to rank their organization as excellent or good at identifying the strengths and the weaknesses in the training process. So I think it comes back to from the beginning in what you build from an NLD perspective, is it already aligned with what you want to achieve with the business? Because then I actually don't think it's so painful to show the ROI after. If you
Mm.
come from a place where we want to achieve this as a business, what can we do to help the business succeed with what's most important? And so and then I think you end up in an easier situation in terms of showing the ROI. And I think sometimes you don't even have to show it as much, because it just makes sense that you're doing what you're doing. You can also speak to it better when it's aligned totally with what the business is trying to achieve.
It's
So
such a great point. It's also, there's that classic conversation that I think that has gone around for a while, where the CFO says to the CEO, "What if we invest in people and they leave?" And the CEO says, "Well, what if we don't and they stay?" Right? And there's a little bit, in my experience, a little bit of faith also you have to have, because if you speak to any CEO, any executive team, they know that investing in people is the right thing, and it does make them better and perform better and so on. And trying to measure every part of what that actually looks like, because sometimes there's a lagging effect. If you learn a skill now, you might not actually use that skill or that knowledge maybe until 6 or 12 months later as well. So trying to like have immediate ROI measurement of this also, I think, can create some false positives in many ways, and actually
yeah.
drive unhealthy behaviors, right?
And I think when I started working in HR back in the day, then it was about did you have a people focused either CEO or CFO, and they would then invest or not, right? But today I think more and more leaders they really do understand that they need to innovate, and they need to constantly, and they need to be agile, and the company needs to reinvent themselves to be able to perform in a market tomorrow that will look very different. So they do understand that they're very dependent on their people to learn and be agile. So I think we are helped in that sense with more leadership teams. At least that's the feeling I have, looking to the people teams in the business to help develop talent in the right direction, and to understand also what is the skills need as we look forward, and then to connect that to the objective of the company. So I think definitely, I think the sentiment in the exec teams has changed lately, or over since Corona kind of happened.
Right.
That's at least my feeling from inside. Yeah.
What do you think, Rocky? I mean, you probably talk to more companies, see more data around this as well. Is because we need to redefine what return means, or is it something else?
Yeah, I think what you had said earlier about that it's hard to see what's going to happen 6 months down the road, right? Like, so you get that training, and then what happens? Like, is the person still using it 6 months down the road, or a year down the road? And my team at ATD, we just took a training on how to be better at giving webinars and talking, public speaking, and it was a great training. But now we have to keep practicing it, right? Because we're not going to get any better if we're not practicing it. And so, trying to show the ROI for taking that course, I'm not able to immediately do that because my team has to practice it, and we're giving webinars, like once a month or twice a month. So it's not a skill that they're using all the time. So I think it's so hard to show that ROI. And, it's something that we may not be doing every single day. And it's something that we have to continue practicing to get better and better at. One training is not going to just fix all of our problems.
We probably also just and we probably have to accept that we're not going to show ROI day one for everything, right? There's some, we believe in it. And I think, and to that extent, I mean, it's also in the report speaking about, what is it then what you measure? And I think, in my opinion, it's fine to measure, were people happy with the course? Did they feel, where did they feel they learned something? And then later, then look at, are they actually applying what they learned? Is it moving them in the right direction towards the career goals that they have, or the OKRs they have set for the team, or so on and so forth. So I think you should definitely do both and see it in a longer perspective. So you can't have the ROI show necessarily on these things the month after. I totally agree.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't be expecting that.
There's also
I don't think
the
so.
final point I would make before we move on to the next one is, I also think this is where like the difference between learning hard skills or soft skills really comes into play. Hard skills, I would imagine you can probably demonstrate proficiency or ROI on faster, versus soft skills is a lifelong practice. Learn how to become a great public speaker, communicator, collaborator, team member, how to have a conversation with an employee in an empathetic and compassionate way. It's not something you necessarily practice every day, would be my guess. And it's probably, I've been a manager for a long time. It's probably something that I'm still getting better at every day, right? Most of us are. So I think that's another thing to like another legacy. But let's move on. We can probably keep on this one all day long.
Absolutely.
The next one, I think it's really around this. So if only 43% of organizations say their learning goals are aligned with business goals, which is kind of frightening stat, what's holding the rest back? And ultimately, who's accountable? Nina, why don't we start with you on this one?
Yeah, and I would just say that in my experience, misalignment between the business and the people teams often comes from two things, and the first leads to the other. So the first one is lack of shared language. So the language of the people teams that they use is just different from the language of the business. So if you sit in on a team meeting and people teams, they will speak very differently about what they do and what they see as a success than if you sit with a leadership team talking about the business success, or like what they need to achieve as a business. And so as a consequence of that lack of shared language, is then a lack of shared ownership, you can say. So it kind of just sits in the L&D department, and nobody really cares other than L&D when it comes down to it. And it's a bit hard for me to say, but I think that is actually what happens in many companies. So I just really think I'm of the opinion that you can get away with not showing ROI if you're aligned with the business goals, and if what you are talking about with the business is relevant to the business. And I think that is very, very key to show. So showing how learning connects to goals, and how those goals connect to the overall objective of the company, that's just so key. And I think in that you already have a seat at the table, much more than you would have even if you have had ROI to some extent. If it's not aligned with the business objectives, it's still a nice to have. So why are we? I can share an example from earlier. So I was working at a scale up before COVID hit, and during those years, and we were like growing in the old-fashioned way, so just boosting the business. We were just hiring and onboarding, and we had set up quite a very nice onboarding program. Getting people up to speed quickly in their roles, and we had put a lot of effort into that, and it did for sure. It had great ROI. And so that was good, as long as we had that need for the business to onboard a lot of people quickly. But then at one point the company had to then lay off some people, and it was something else that became important. So now the business objective was very different. So even though there was a great ROI on the onboarding, it just wasn't relevant for the business. So again, I just really want to put it into perspective that no matter what you do, if it's not aligned with the business objective in a business setting, it's probably not gonna kind of it isn't sustainable long term. It's not that everything has to be 100% directed towards the business objective all the time. It's not what I'm saying, but I just think those are some of the things. So at least a big part of what you do in the people team needs to be aligned to that. And if you think about it, I think like in any other department in a company, you wouldn't have a situation where they would talk about nice things to do just because they felt like doing it, because it would be nice for a group of people, right? They would definitely talk about what is it we need to do to achieve our goals. And I think to that extent, what L&D teams can and people teams can learn a lot from is to see the employees and the business as their customers and design the experience based on that. And in that, I think they'll really get a seat at the table in a new way than a lot have today.
That's great practical advice. What I'm hearing is get aligned with the
From reality out there.
The business or the department. Rocky, you're obviously very familiar with this data. This comes from you and your research and everything else. What's your take on this, and what actions can companies, organizations take to ensure this doesn't happen?
Yeah, and I love Nina's story about how you could have great ROI, but if it's not aligned to the business goals, what difference does it make, right? Like, it's not going to help anything. So, when we go in and look at the data, the good news is that only 2% said that they're not aligned at all, right? Like, so 43% said that they're very aligned, but 2% said they're not aligned at all. So there are organizations that are kind of somewhere in the middle. But what can we do about this is, I think we really need to examine our organization's goals and their KPIs and think about where we fit in and where can we make a difference and where can we help. And, I heard somebody speaking a few weeks ago that they said, other departments speak in problems, and it's important for the talent development and HR profession to speak in solutions, right? Like, so everybody else is talking about the problems that they have, but we need to come in with the solutions on how to help fix those things. And that was really powerful to me to think about, switching our language to be solution-based rather than problem-based. And, we had talked earlier, Nina, you had talked about, getting a seat at the table is just so important. And we earlier did research at ATD in a different study and we found that 3 in 4 organizations, so about 75% of organizations, said that talent development is represented in their senior leadership team. But for that 25% that's not, that's huge, that they're not at the table. They're not hearing what those KPIs are. They're not having those conversations with the leadership team. So it's really important to get a seat at the table. And, one way to do that, and I actually did this at an organization. I was a department of one and I was not part of the leadership team. And I was like, how do I get a seat at that table, right? Like, how do I get to those meetings? And what I started to do was use the data that I had to make business decisions, and using that data with other people within the organization to be like, hey, look at this number. We could fix this way. And then I started getting invited to those meetings as a guest person. And then finally, like, they were like, okay, you're showing up to every meeting. You just need to join.
Might as well just stay.
And, when we look at the data that we have from this report, we found that only 30% of organizations said that they're really good at using the data to make business decisions. So this is something talent development really struggles with. And only 28%, so only a little over a quarter, said that they're really good at communicating the impact of learning. So we're doing all this great work, but then we're not talking about it, right? Like, we're not tooting our own horn, right? Like, we're not saying we're doing all this great stuff. So I think it's really important that we're communicating and we're talking about the good work that we're doing. Also, I think it's so important that, every group that you're talking to within an organization, they may need that data a little bit differently, right? Like, so if you're talking to the department, they're going to want that data real in the weeds, right? Like, they're going to want to know the nitty gritty of that data. Whereas when you're talking to the C-suite or your leadership team, they want to know that high level, right? Like they don't want to know what person 32 said on a survey. Like they want to know that high level information. So I think part of communicating all of our results is thinking about the audience that you're talking to. So yeah, I mean, I know I kind of went off on a tangent there, but that's what I think about aligning.
I think you're right, and I think a lot of things that never surface that is being done in those teams, right? And I think also we have to realize that those teams are perhaps also not historically the team that where there's been most investment in terms of heads and skills and capabilities. It's often a nice to have a person that they said this person is good. She's good at having some nice sessions with our employee, or he is, and that's it. So it's also now we're just demanding much more of skills that I don't think we've invested enough in them historically, also to have a chance to actually always deliver towards the new requirements.
This is I feel like that you can easily, I think, get lost in kind of the weeds of just focusing on data. But I think a lot of it comes down to this combination of you got to have alignment and the data, right? Because one without the other is probably a little bit useless, would be my guess, right? It's kind of what I'm hearing you say. Look, if we talk practically, we're in this age of AI acceleration everywhere, and every single organization is thinking about how do we reskill, upskill, retool, whatever words you want to use to become AI first. How do I get my team members to use it, my employees? How do we retool our processes? So, and again, like we talked about earlier, I think this is maybe a combination of this question here around alignment, but also the previous one around measurement. How would you advise a leader who's thinking about, we need to get everybody using AI more, but where do you start? How do you measure it? How do you get alignment on this? I mean, everyone's talking about it, but I doubt it's going to show up on many of the top 3 or 5 priorities of many companies yet. It's more around growth and new products and expansion and all. I don't know, Brock, if you want to start off with this one, what you're seeing, and then maybe we take Nina next.
Yeah, so we've been doing a lot of research on AI, big surprise, because it's such a hot topic right now. And, I think it's so important to know what your organization's policies are around AI to begin with, right? Like, because I know for me at ATD, we don't put our data into ChatGPT, right? Like that is against our policy, because you have to think about your data privacy. So it's so important to start off with knowing what the policies are at your organization before you even start using any of this AI. And then also, I think a good way to use AI right now is to ask AI questions, like if you're doing some kind of data analysis, and maybe you're not very good at data analysis, ask it questions of like, how do I write this Excel formula, right? Rather than like putting your data into it, be like, hey, ChatGPT, how do I do this formula in Excel? So I think that's like a good way to start using it, if it's okay with your organization. But also, I feel like in talent development, we're kind of like in this middle ground, right? So like we're starting to use AI, but we're also being asked to train on AI, and we may not be the experts on AI, right? But we're asked to create trainings to train people, and we found in a different study that I want to say it's about 50%. I don't have the number right in front of me. Said that they're doing AI practical training within their organization. So they're giving people the skills on, how to write good prompts and to how to use AI ethically. So, I think it's interesting to think about how we're using AI within organizations and how TD fits into that. And, I think we need to, again, have a seat at that table of, talking about how to use AI within the organization, because we're going to be asked to train people on how to use it.
For sure.
Yeah. And I think this is and the transformation that we're going to go through with AI, it's a different one, because I think it's actually a cooperation between the people team, who's going to upskill the employees, and then the technical team. So we have a super great CTO/CIO who's just like on the front of all of this, and we're doing so much already. And I think back to what we're talking about the communication also, because we're actually
Mhm.
doing so many things in our organization to make sure that we're good at using AI and using it for what we can to boost everyone to be more successful. And what I've just recently talked with the teams about is that we're actually doing so many things, but it's not visible, like together what it is we're doing. So what we're actually achieving, because I actually think we're moving super fast. So it's actually a success story. And I think like the cooperation there between the technical team and the people team is that we can actually make it visible, and also like make sure that we
Yes.
take the learnings, communicate better, train better. Because I think what it's ended up with to begin with is a lot of we do have some peer-to-peer organizations, but it's also a lot of formal learning, which doesn't, it just, it's difficult for some people to learn from that, and they don't have time. And so how do we make it more experimental, and you sit next to someone? But we're already doing so much. So actually here it's about just taking that need from the company, stuff that's already going on, and then just really putting it into a structure where we get the most out of the stuff that's already happening. So I think it's such an interesting case. I really love, I'm so excited about what we're going to go
Well,
through with it.
you and I, we work together. I can say very publicly that you're doing a great job of leading the company and the teams through the age of AI. And big shout out to Freddie, our CTO, who is also doing a fantastic job. Before we get down into the AI rabbit hole, which I think we can probably talk a lot more about, and if you have any questions, again, please put them in the chat. Let's get to the next question, really. And the next question is really framed this way: 93% of organizations collect satisfaction data, very high, but only 42% measure behavior change. So there's obviously a huge disconnect there. The question really is, are we just measuring what's convenient instead of what counts? And it's a great question, something I've been on my mind for a long time. Rocky, do you want to start with this one?
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, we are. We're measuring what's convenient. We're measuring what's easy. We're measuring what we understand, what we are comfortable with, what we know. And David had asked a question in the chat about measuring the impact of training, which goes right along with this question that you asked, Robin. And I think that when it comes to measuring impact, some things that we can really think about doing are doing those like pre-post surveys, right? Like find out what people are doing beforehand, and then find out what people are doing afterwards and how they're using that training. And then survey again 6 months later to see if they're still using, if they've had behavior change. Another way that you could do this is do a retrospective post-only survey where you ask people in that post survey things like, what were you doing before this training? And now what are you doing? Because sometimes when we take a pre-survey, we don't even realize the things that we don't know yet. And so we may say that, oh, we're really good at that, but maybe we're not really good at that. But we think we are because we've not learned enough about it. So, sometimes a retrospective post-only survey can really be helpful as well. But getting back to like this question about, are we doing what's convenient? Like I said, I think we absolutely are. People like smile sheets, people like those satisfaction surveys. Everybody thinks that they're really good at writing them. I think I told you guys a story earlier about a place that I used to work where one of the departments was creating smile sheets on a program that they were offering, and they then we're reporting out that 100% of people all said the program was good, and 100% said the facilitator was good, and 100% said, just everything was at 100% said everything was good. And when I asked to see the survey, what I realized was that their response options were awesome, great, and good, right? Like those were the only three. So what was the worst? So the person that created that survey didn't quite understand how to create a survey, but like I said, everybody thinks that they can do that they can create a survey and get the satisfaction data. So we had to work on that survey a little bit, and offer some not so positive response options. But in the research that we did with you all, we found that 88% of organizations are collecting some kind of user reactions also. They said that 81% are collecting completion data. So just how many people are completing that training. 74% are just measuring the number of people that take that training. So, butts in the seats is what we're counting. And, those are easy things, again, to collect, but they don't always tell us about behavior change. And so, 90% told us that it's difficult to isolate, that learning impact. So this is a challenge for everybody.
Yeah.
And, another thing that we're finding is that participants don't always cooperate, right? Like they don't want to take that survey at the end. They've just sat through this whole training and now they don't want to take a survey. They're tired. They just want to go home. And 69% told us that that's a problem at their organization. It's just getting somebody to give them data at the end. And, one way that we can help fix that is to show learners the results. I've talked to other TD professionals who have said that they will do like a pre-survey before they start the training, and then they use those results throughout the training. And that way the learners can see, like, we're using the data that you're giving us. And then afterwards, they'll again share that data out to the participants to say, like, okay, this is what we've seen. These are these behavior changes that we've seen. So I think, if we want to talk about action items with this, I would say it's so important for talent development professionals to take a class and learn more about how to measure behavior change. That how to do that data analysis, how to really measure change. And then just pick one training and start there, right? We don't have to do everything all at once. Just start small, start with one training and try to measure behavior change for one training.
I love it. This is super insightful. I'm a glass half full kind of person, so I'm going to start asking my team, how am I doing? Awesome, great, good. There you go. It's the best way to write a survey. I think it's.
Well, you creating that survey.
Before we get off and get to meet, another question for you, Rocky, is: so if a CEO comes to you or an executive says, "Well, what is one metric we should be using to measure the impact?" What would you advise on?
I think it depends on what it is that we're trying to figure out, right? Like, so if we're trying to fix some problems within a call center, right? So maybe we are noticing that we have customers that are really unhappy once they call a call center. Then we should be measuring customer satisfaction. We're probably already collecting customer satisfaction. There's probably some other department that needs that data, and talent development could be using it also. That we could look at before we did a training, what was our customer satisfaction level at? Then we can do a training, and then afterwards we can start to measure that customer satisfaction again to see if we're seeing a change. So I think it really depends on what is it that we're trying to measure, and what is it that we're trying to make an impact with that training.
Makes sense.
Absolutely.
You've been an HR leader in some of the leading companies in the world, and you see this data. What do you think?
What do I think? I think it's so when I read this, it's like, our L&D team's not trying hard enough out there. I think they are, right. I just think it's not a super easy situation that they're in. I do think it's important to connect the outcome of the training to what we want to do as a business. And I think so really like shifting from measuring activities that we do to measuring the impact. Like, how does that change? How does what we're doing here impact the situation overall for the teams and for the business? And I think I'm very hopeful around AI actually helping us with achieving that to a further extent than it has been. It's when I left some years ago, I left my job as an HR leader to make my own company, where we talked about we wanted to make culture and values. We wanted to show it and measure it in a way so that it could be used at a strategic level to get a seat at the table, to get that agenda seat at the table. And I think that's what teams are always thinking about. It is, how is it that we can show that we are having the impact, a positive impact on the business that we cannot live without? And I think the people teams have already been doing that for many, many years. I think it's about just making that connection more visible in many cases. So I guess that's what I'm thinking around this.
I know you were recently
I
at,
think for me, I would also say one more thing is I think we've had these in a couple of like organizations I've been in where we have these very broad L&D programs. So there's so much content, so much to have to go through. Where sometimes I think less is better. So like we have an issue with converting, leads someplace in the go-to-market funnel from this stage to this
Mhm,
stage. We know it's happening in this team. Go in, look at what is it today, train the team, see if it helps. Like we need to make sure
mhm,
people stay longer in our Japan office, because they leave too
mhm,
quickly. Understand what it is, try to train the leaders so they can cater for that, see if it goes up. So I think it's also because sometimes what we end up doing is we train people in these very generic things and not necessarily in actually those. We don't go in and actually solve business challenges. And I think we have this department actually have the opportunity to do that much more. So yeah,
mhm.
that's it.
Well, yeah, it's great. I know you were recently on stage at the Festival of Work, one of the largest HR events in the world, talking about the strata for work and how we need to create that for
Yeah.
businesses to have better insights around their metrics and so on. So tell us a little bit about what is the vision that you have around what companies need to do there.
Yeah, and so that's the human success score, and it's a score where we combine performance, learning, and engagement, right? Because what we're
Mhm,
thinking is if we have learning without anything else, it doesn't really matter. It's not sustainable. It won't have an
mhm,
impact in the context that it needs to have an impact in, and so it'll be at one point redundant, right?
mhm,
So we need to connect it to the performance,
mhm,
and that's not to say, again, back to, it's not either we take advantage of the employee or we learn. Like it can be both, right? Because I believe that we all want to learn and contribute where we're at, and if we're in a company, we're probably aligned with the vision and the mission of the company, and we want to succeed, right? So these two things we have to have. And the learning is really also again about are we ready for the market of tomorrow? And then the engagement piece is, of course, do we then keep people for longer? But it's also very much about, are people in the right mindset to actually learn, to actually perform over time? So these three things connected, I will say, solve a lot of the
mhm,
challenges that we're seeing here.
mhm,
And that's
mhm.
really what I spoke about in London a couple of weeks ago.
See if we can go find some more information about it. Let's. I know we're coming up on time, and I think it feels like we could talk for 3-4 hours easily if
Yeah.
we wanted to. Some final thoughts and maybe some action items that people listening in could take to make sure that they get better alignment, better measurement, better outcomes, basically from their investment in learning, knowing that everybody wants to do it, but maybe, like we said earlier, not everybody knows exactly how or why and so on. Rocky, why don't we start with you with some final thoughts?
Yeah, so before I get to my final thoughts, I wanted to mention that Rosemary mentioned the NPS, the Net Promoter Score, in the comments, and that's one of her go-to metrics that she uses. And I'm a fan of the NPS score, but I always make sure I ask it as a two-part question, right? Like, so get that number, and that 0 to 10, how likely are you to recommend whatever it is that
Yeah.
you're measuring? But then the second part of that question is why, right? Like, because that is so insightful, is to know the why part of it. Because some people will say, I don't have anybody to recommend it to. Well, okay, that's why they're giving you a 0, right?
Yeah.
Like, because they don't have anybody, or they're like, I don't recommend it to, I just don't recommend things to people. Like, okay, well, that's a good reason. Like, but then it's bringing down our Net Promoter Score. So I think it's so important to ask that why behind the NPS score. So just wanted to mention that because I'm a big fan of NPS as well, Rosemary. But getting to my final thoughts on everything that we've talked about today, I think it's so important just to have a data collection plan from the beginning. That when we're starting to put together our learning program, that we're thinking at the beginning about what data are we going to collect, and then how are we going to use that data. Because I think so many times it comes as an afterthought, or we ask questions but we don't have a plan for how we're actually going to use that data. And I feel like I have a broken record because I'm always telling people or asking people what are you going to do with that data point? Why are we asking? Because I don't want to waste people's time and give them a 30-minute survey and then we're only going to use 2 questions out of it. So, I think it's so important to have that data plan. And, I think also I do this, I know. I rely heavily on surveys. I like them. I am a quantitative researcher and I like surveys. But we need to diversify sometimes how we're collecting data. You can use surveys, absolutely use a survey, but then also have focus groups, have interviews, have those informal conversations at the water cooler about what somebody thought about a training. Those are all ways that you can be collecting data that is not necessarily like asking things on a survey. So I think diversifying how we're collecting all of this information can also really be impactful.
I love it. It sounds to me like think about the end in mind and work backwards from there to define the program. But yeah, it's awesome. Honestly, awesome advice. We should do that more for sure. Nina, what about you? Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I would probably say, like, if you were gonna rethink or rebuild how you do L&D, then I would say try and stop doing everything you do, and then take 1 year where you identify the 3 to 5 main challenges for the business, and then everything you do, everything you train for that year is just to helping the business achieving that. I think that's how we need to think, and that would be really powerful, I think.
No, I love it. I love it. This has been really great. We're coming to the end here, and I just want to say to everyone, but mostly to you, Rocky, and you, Nina, thank you for the really great spirited discussion around this, because there's so many action items that we can take around getting better alignment, measurements, thinking about what we want to have the outcomes be to actually get to become the top 4% of how those teams outperform the rest. Really want to appreciate everybody joining, and especially you, Nina, especially you, Rocky. Thank you so much for the great insights and conversation. Thank you, everyone.